The aliens trembled. Human Deathworlders emerged from the shadows. The Vraden Empire was a force unlike any the galaxy had seen before. For centuries, they had swept through the stars, conquering world after world, bending civilizations to their will. Their ships moved like shadows through the vastness of space, always silent, always relentless. With their advanced weaponry and nearly indestructible armor, the Vraden had come to believe that no species could stand against them. They were the perfect conquerors, a race of alien warriors built to dominate. On their many conquests, they had faced fierce resistance from various species, but none had ever truly threatened them. Most races fell to their might without much struggle. So when the Vraden set their sights on Earth, they expected nothing different. To them, humans were just another primitive race, one that would crumble under the pressure of superior technology. The Vraden scouts had observed Earth for several months, analyzing every aspect of the planet's defenses. What they found was puzzling at first. The humans had no global empire. They were divided into nations, each with its own conflicts and interests. They seemed weak, uncoordinated, and lacking the advanced weaponry of other species the Vraden had conquered. They believed the humans would be easy to wipe out, but they had made a grave mistake. They had underestimated humanity's greatest strength, its unpredictability. As the Vraden began their invasion, they sent dozens of warships to Earth, each one larger and more powerful than anything humanity had ever seen. They arrived without warning, descending into the atmosphere with a speed that made the ground shake. The cities below had no chance to prepare. The first wave of destruction came fast, leaving little room for defense. In mere hours, the Vraden forces had taken out Earth's main communications satellites and crippled the planet's ability to respond. Governments scrambled to organize, but it was clear that no one was ready for the scale of the assault. The Vraden soldiers descended from their ships, armed with weapons that burned through metal like paper. Their armor, nearly impervious to human technology, made them unstoppable in combat. They tore through Earth's military forces with ease. Tanks were destroyed with a single shot, fighter jets were reduced to scrap in seconds, and even the most advanced human weapons were rendered useless. The Vraden had the upper hand in every way imaginable, but as the Vraden advanced, something unexpected happened. The humans didn't surrender. They didn't cower in fear. Instead, they fought back. At first, it was small pockets of resistance. Civilians armed with whatever weapons they could find, homemade explosives, old military rifles, even sharpened metal pipes. The Vraden were surprised by the sheer determination of the humans. Though they were vastly outgunned, the humans fought with an intensity that was hard to ignore. In a small town in the United States, a group of civilians had managed to hold off a Vraden scouting party for nearly a day. They used the terrain to their advantage, setting traps and ambushes, drawing the alien forces into places where their superior technology could not save them. While the Vraden were used to fighting on open ground, where their firepower could overwhelm any enemy, the humans knew their land. They knew how to fight in the shadows, how to move quickly and strike with precision. This human ingenuity caught the Vraden off guard. But the aliens quickly adapted, sending in larger forces and heavier weaponry. They had the numbers, the technology, and the firepower. It seemed impossible for the humans to stand a chance. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, the human resistance continued to grow. Across the globe, small groups of soldiers, scientists, and civilians alike banded together. They didn't have the luxury of advanced alien tech, but they had something far more powerful, a drive to protect their homes, their families, and their way of life. In hidden military bunkers deep beneath the Earth's surface, humanity's most secret weapon began to stir. These soldiers were the best of the best, trained in ways no alien could understand. They were known as the Deathworlders, a title given to them for their ability to survive and thrive in Earth's most hostile environments. These were the soldiers who had been raised in the most dangerous parts of the world. Deserts where temperatures reached over 120 degrees F, jungles teeming with deadly predators, and frozen tundras where the cold could kill a man in minutes. From birth, these soldiers had been trained to adapt to the harshest environments imaginable. They were survivalists, warriors who could endure anything: extreme heat, freezing cold, toxic air, and even the deadliest creatures of Earth's wildest places. They had learned to think faster, move smarter, and fight harder than any enemy they faced. Most importantly, they had learned to be invisible. And now, as the Vraden invaded, the Deathworlders had begun to emerge from the shadows. In a secret facility in the heart of the Australian outback, Captain Alina Devine stood in front of a team of her finest soldiers. They were ready to deploy. The Vraden might have thought they could destroy humanity, but they had no idea what they were up against. The Deathworlders were about to show them just how dangerous a cornered human could be. Alina gave a single nod. The time for hiding was over. They would take the fight to the invaders. The Vraden Empire had never encountered an enemy like the humans. While they expected swift victory, their expectations were quickly dashed by the fierce resistance humanity put up. The small pockets of civilian fighters had proven that humans were not as weak as they had been made out to be. These human rebels had shown a willingness to fight, even when the odds were stacked against them. But this was only the beginning. The alien invaders were not used to being challenged. Every species the Vraden had conquered had fallen in line quickly, their civilizations easily overrun by the overwhelming power of the Vraden forces. Their technology was far superior, their weapons more advanced, and their armor stronger. Yet here on Earth, they faced something they couldn't understand, a human resistance that never gave up, that refused to break. As the battles raged across the planet, the Vraden began to realize that these humans were different from anything they had faced before. They fought with an intensity that made no sense to the aliens. They used every resource they could find to slow down the invasion, from makeshift traps to ambushes in the thick forests, and even launching guerrilla raids on the invaders' supply lines. The Vraden's sophisticated technology could defeat most opponents in seconds, but it seemed useless against the unpredictable human tactics. It was as though the humans were playing a game the Vraden didn't know the rules of. In the midst of the chaos, something else was unfolding in the shadows. Hidden beneath the surface of the planet, deep in underground bunkers and secure military bases, the true strength of humanity was stirring. The Deathworlders, human warriors trained to survive in Earth's harshest environments, had long been kept out of the limelight, hidden away from the world. These soldiers had been raised in places so dangerous that they were considered uninhabitable by most other species. To the Deathworlders, these were home. In the frozen wilderness of Siberia, children had been taught to hunt and survive in temperatures that could freeze the blood in their veins. They learned to navigate ice caves and cross glaciers that would swallow a person whole. In the scorching deserts of Africa, others were raised to survive without food or water for days, enduring heat that could melt metal. And in the jungles of South America, there were those who lived alongside the most lethal predators on Earth, learning how to track and kill with deadly precision. These were the Deathworlders. They were not just soldiers, they were the living embodiment of survival itself. And now, Earth's darkest hour had arrived, and these warriors were ready to answer the call. Inside a military facility in the Rocky Mountains, a group of Deathworlders gathered in a dimly lit war room. Captain Alina Devine, their leader, stood before them, her eyes steely with determination. Her dark hair was tied back in a tight braid, and her expression was one of calm focus. She had spent years training for this moment. Now the time had come to show the Vraden what humanity was capable of. Alina spoke to her team. The Vraden think they can destroy us. They think they can wipe us out with their superior technology, but they don't understand what it means to be human. We'll show them the cost of underestimating us. Her words were met with quiet nods from the soldiers. Each of them had been through hell to get here, taught to survive in places that no one else could. They had fought the harshest conditions Earth could throw at them, and they had emerged victorious. Now they would take the fight to the invaders who had underestimated their world. The Vraden were making a mistake. They thought their high-tech weapons and unrelenting advance would crush Earth's defenses. What they didn't know was that humanity had something far more dangerous than advanced technology. They had the will to fight, to survive at all costs. And the Deathworlders were the living proof of that. As the Deathworlders prepared for their first mission, Alina gave a quiet order to her team. It's time to move out. Let's show them the true meaning of fear. Elsewhere across the globe, the human resistance was intensifying. The cities that had once seemed like easy targets for the Vraden invaders were beginning to rally together. Nations that had been divided by conflict now found common ground in the face of a common enemy. And from every corner of the world, humanity's greatest weapon was emerging. unity. In the forests of the Pacific Northwest, a group of civilians had managed to ambush a group of Vraden scouts using nothing more than homemade traps and a few old rifles. In the streets of London, makeshift barricades were built by the people to defend their homes. Even in the vast deserts of the Middle East, humans began to strike back. They had no advanced weaponry, but they had something the Vraden couldn't predict: a refusal to surrender. As the Vraden pressed forward with their conquest, they were now forced to contend with humans who knew their land better than any invader ever could. The humans didn't need to rely on superior technology. They used their environment to their advantage. They moved in ways that the Vraden couldn't follow, adapting quickly to the challenges of war. And with each victory, no matter how small, the human resistance grew bolder. But it was the Deathworlders who would lead the charge. Alina and her soldiers had been training for this moment their entire lives. Their knowledge of the terrain, their survival instincts, and their ability to blend into the shadows gave them an edge that the Vraden could not match. They would fight not only for Earth, but for the very survival of humanity. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the Deathworlders set out for their first mission: to infiltrate a Vraden stronghold on the outskirts of Paris. The stronghold was a massive fortress built to withstand any assault. The Vraden had thought it invulnerable, but Alina and her team had a different plan. The Deathworlders moved like ghosts through the night, using the terrain to their advantage. They scaled cliffs, crept through dense forests, and crossed open fields without a sound. Every step they took was calculated, every move precise. They had spent years honing these skills. Now it was time to put them to use. As they approached the stronghold, Alina signaled for the team to stop. She knelt down, scanning the area through binoculars. In the distance, she could see the Vraden soldiers patrolling the perimeter. But they were not prepared for what was about to happen. With a whispered command, the Deathworlders began their assault. They moved swiftly and silently, taking out the Vraden guards one by one, using knives and silent weapons. The Vraden had no idea what was happening until it was too late. By the time the first alarm sounded, the Deathworlders had already breached the outer defenses of the stronghold. They had disabled the alien technology that powered the fortress's shields, and now the human fighters were free to move in. Alina stood at the center of the battlefield, her heart pounding in her chest. This was their first true victory, but it was only the beginning. The Vraden had underestimated humanity, and now they would learn just how dangerous a cornered species could be. As the Deathworlders moved deeper into the stronghold, Alina glanced up at the stars above. She knew that the war was far from over, but the Vraden had made a grave mistake. They had awoken something in humanity that could not be stopped. The Vraden had underestimated humanity, but now they were starting to feel the effects of their mistake. Earth's military forces, though small compared to the alien empire, were fighting back with surprising resilience. The Deathworlders, the secret soldiers of Earth, had shown the Vraden that the human spirit could not be crushed, no matter the odds. In the days following the attack on the Paris stronghold, the humans continued to strike back with increasing ferocity. Cities that had once seemed helpless under the alien invasion now had pockets of resistance growing stronger with every passing hour. Small victories were beginning to add up. While the Vraden were skilled in warfare, they were unprepared for the guerrilla tactics and ingenuity of Earth's defenders. The Deathworlders, now fully unleashed, moved like shadows across the battlefields. Trained to survive in the most hostile environments, they knew how to adapt to any situation. Whether it was the thick, toxic jungles of South America or the frozen wilderness of Siberia, the Deathworlders were in their element. They did not rely on the same advanced weaponry as the Vraden. Instead, they used the land, the environment, and their superior survival skills to gain the upper hand. Captain Alina Devine, leader of the Deathworlders, stood at the edge of a small cliff overlooking a Vraden military base. Her dark eyes scanned the enemy's movements, calculating the best course of action. She knew the Vraden would expect an all-out assault, but that was not the Deathworlders' way. They would take a different approach, one that would catch the Vraden completely off guard. "Time to move," Alina whispered to her team. Her soldiers, wearing advanced camouflage that blended seamlessly with the surrounding landscape, nodded in silence. They had trained for years to be this precise, this efficient. Every movement, every decision had to be perfect. They had learned how to become invisible, how to fight from the shadows without leaving a trace. The Vraden base ahead was heavily guarded. Massive turrets lined the perimeter, and alien patrols moved in organized patterns, unaware of the impending attack. To an outsider, it might have seemed like a nearly impenetrable fortress, but the Deathworlders knew better. To them, this was just another battlefield, another challenge to conquer. They descended from the cliff and moved with purpose, like hunters stalking their prey. As they approached the base, they split into smaller units, each given a specific target. Alina's team was tasked with taking out the communication tower. If they could disable it, the Vraden would be cut off from their command and reinforcements. With practiced ease, the Deathworlders moved silently through the underbrush, staying low and using the terrain to cover their movements. Their weapons, though primitive compared to the Vraden's advanced technology, were deadly in the hands of skilled soldiers. They carried silencers, knives, and explosive charges, and each weapon was designed to be used with efficiency, not flair. The goal was simple: strike quickly, strike hard, and leave no trace. As they neared the base's perimeter, Alina signaled for her team to halt. She crouched low behind a boulder, peering through a pair of high-powered binoculars. The Vraden patrols were too close for comfort. She motioned for two of her soldiers to move to the left, while she and the rest of the team would take the right. Silently, they moved into position. The Deathworlders were experts at staying out of sight, and within moments they were behind enemy lines. One by one, they took out the Vraden patrols. A soldier moved behind a guard, silencing him with a swift knife strike to the throat. Another soldier disabled a surveillance camera with a precise shot from his sniper rifle. Everything was done quietly, quickly, and without hesitation. Alina's heart raced as they closed in on the communication tower. They were almost there. But as they neared their target, a soft beeping sound pierced the air. Alina froze, her mind racing. It was the sound of a proximity alarm. One of the Vraden had triggered it. The base was on high alert. "We've been spotted," Alina said, her voice calm but firm. "Change of plan." "We move faster." The Deathworlders didn't hesitate. They had been in worse situations before. They knew how to adapt, how to think on their feet. Alina signaled for her team to split up and take separate routes to the tower. Each soldier would have to make their own way, but they had trained for this. There was no room for failure. As they approached the tower, the Vraden soldiers began to mobilize, rushing to reinforce their positions. Alina's team moved even faster, using the confusion to their advantage. The Deathworlders knew that time was running out. If they didn't disable the tower now, the Vraden would call for reinforcements, and their mission would fail. One of Alina's soldiers, Sergeant Ramos, took point. He sprinted ahead, his legs moving in powerful strides. The ground shook with the sound of his boots hitting the dirt, but he didn't stop. He reached the base of the tower, placing a set of explosive charges along the lower support beams. His hands moved with practiced precision, his focus unshaken by the growing noise of Vraden soldiers closing in. "Charges set," Ramos whispered into his comm device. "We've got 5 minutes." Alina nodded and motioned for the rest of her team to fall back. The Vraden were closing in fast, and it was only a matter of time before they would be swarming the area. It was time to leave, before the Vraden realized just how much damage had been done. With the charges set, Alina's team began to retreat. They moved in perfect coordination, disappearing into the trees and hills with an almost unnatural silence. The Vraden soldiers were still too disoriented to react, their attention focused on the perimeter. As Alina and her team reached a safe distance, they took cover behind a rock formation, watching the base from a distance. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Alina's hand hovered over the detonator. She waited for the perfect moment. Finally, the time came. With a single press of the button, the ground erupted in a series of violent explosions. The communication tower collapsed in a cloud of smoke and debris. The shockwave rippled through the Vraden base, throwing soldiers to the ground and leaving the enemy forces in chaos. "Mission accomplished," Alina said, her voice steady. As the Deathworlders melted into the surrounding wilderness, they knew they had struck a significant blow against the Vraden invaders. The loss of communication would slow their efforts, disrupt their command structure, and buy humanity much-needed time. But Alina wasn't celebrating. The battle was far from over. The Vraden would retaliate, of that she was certain. They were a ruthless enemy, and they would not take this defeat lightly. But for the first time since the invasion began, Alina felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The Deathworlders had made their mark on the battlefield, and the Vraden were starting to realize just how dangerous humanity could be. The explosion from the communication tower rocked the Vraden base to its core. The shockwaves sent soldiers flying in all directions, their armor dented and their systems malfunctioning. For the first time since the Vraden had set foot on Earth, they were thrown into disarray. What had once seemed like an invincible fortress now lay in ruins. The ground smoldered with the remnants of their communication equipment, and chaos erupted within the Vraden ranks. In the distance, Alina stood tall on a hill, her heart pounding as the dust settled. Her team had done what they set out to do. The Vraden were now cut off from their command. They had no way to call for reinforcements. The balance of power had shifted, even if just for a moment. Alina allowed herself a rare moment of satisfaction, watching as the Vraden scrambled to restore order. But she knew this victory was temporary. The Vraden were not a species to be so easily defeated. They were relentless, and they would find a way to strike back. Alina turned to her team, signaling for them to move out. The mission wasn't over, not by a long shot. They needed to keep pressing the advantage, keep pushing the Vraden until they understood that humans were not the weak, primitive species they had assumed. As the Deathworlders melted into the wilderness once more, the team remained vigilant. Alina was no longer just leading a group of soldiers. She was leading a movement, a revolution. The humans had never known such unified resistance, and now Earth's defenders had a voice they hadn't had before. Every small victory, every successful strike against the invaders was showing the Vraden something they hadn't expected. Humans would fight for their planet, and they would do whatever it took to win. Meanwhile, on the Vraden flagship, High Commander Krylos was livid. He stood on the bridge, glaring at the holographic display of Earth below. His forces, which had once seemed unstoppable, were now bogged down in a war that was becoming more difficult by the hour. The communication tower had been destroyed, and despite his superior firepower, the humans were adapting faster than he anticipated. "We cannot let them continue like this," Krylos growled. "Increase the pressure. Bombard their cities, annihilate their resistance. Make an example of them." His officers exchanged nervous glances. They had never seen Krylos so furious. The Vraden had always prided themselves on their power, their technological superiority, and their ability to crush any enemy. Yet now they were struggling against a species they had once written off as nothing more than a nuisance. "Sir," one of the officers said cautiously, "our forces are stretched thin. We are already dealing with multiple points of resistance. We need reinforcements." Krylos slammed his fist against the console. "No more reinforcements. This ends now. We will use our most advanced weaponry to level their cities. If they wish to die with honor, then let them." The officer hesitated. "But sir, the humans have something we have not yet accounted for. They fight differently. They use the land itself to their advantage, and these, Deathworlders, they are unlike anything we've encountered." Krylos' eyes narrowed. "The Deathworlders are nothing but myth. They are a fantasy, a story told by the humans to make themselves seem stronger than they really are." But deep down, Krylos wasn't so sure. The reports from their scouts were starting to paint a different picture. One of soldiers who could adapt to any environment, who could survive under the harshest conditions, and who fought with a tenacity that the Vraden had never seen before. These humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting because they had something to protect. Back on Earth, Alina and her team had already begun preparations for their next strike. Their mission was clear: disrupt the Vraden's supply lines and cripple their ability to maintain their foothold on Earth. The Deathworlders had proven they could strike swiftly and disappear into the shadows, but this next mission would require a different approach. Alina gathered her team in a makeshift command center, an old, abandoned factory in the heart of a war-torn city. Maps of the Vraden's positions were spread across the table, and a series of plans and contingency routes had been drawn up. The plan was risky, but it was their best chance at crippling the invaders. "We hit their supply depot," Alina said, pointing to a location on the map. "This is their main source of fuel, ammunition, and food. Without it, they will be forced to retreat or risk running out of resources. If we take it out, we'll buy Earth the time it needs to regroup." One of the soldiers, Private Tessa, raised her hand. "How do we plan to get close without being detected?" They've increased their patrols since the last attack. Alina met her gaze. We use their arrogance against them. They think they've already won. They think they can't be beaten. We're going to show them just how wrong they are. The Deathworlders would infiltrate the supply depot in small, isolated groups. They would move under the cover of night, slipping past the Vraden's defenses and striking when the invaders least expected it. It would be dangerous, but the Deathworlders were used to danger. They thrived on it. As Alina gave the final orders to her team, she could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for something much larger, a future where Earth would be free, where humans could live without the fear of being conquered by alien forces. The Vraden thought they had already won. They believed they had the power, the resources, and the technology to crush humanity. But they hadn't yet encountered the heart of Earth's defenders. The will to fight, the strength to survive against all odds, and the deep, unshakable belief that the future belonged to humanity, not the invaders. As night fell over the battlefield, Alina's team set out on their mission. They moved swiftly and silently, blending into the darkness. Every step was calculated, every movement precise. There was no room for error. The Vraden would not give them a second chance. The journey to the supply depot took hours. The Deathworlders knew how to move through the terrain undetected, how to avoid the Vraden patrols that wandered the area. They didn't rely on the latest technology. They relied on their training, their instincts, and their knowledge of the land. As they neared the supply depot, Alina signaled for the team to halt. The complex was guarded, but the Vraden were focused on the perimeter, unaware of the threat moving in from the shadows. The Deathworlders positioned themselves at strategic points around the depot, waiting for the signal. Alina took a deep breath. The time had come. Now, she whispered, and the Deathworlders sprang into action. The night was eerily quiet as the Deathworlders approached the supply depot, their every step synchronized, their breathing steady and controlled. They moved like shadows, slipping through the darkness without a sound, their eyes trained on the task ahead. It was a delicate operation. One mistake could mean disaster, but the team knew their mission well. They had trained for moments like this their entire lives. Now was the time to prove that humanity's survival instincts were stronger than the Vraden's firepower. Captain Alina Devine moved at the front of the group, her mind sharp and focused. Her dark eyes scanned the supply depot ahead, taking in every detail. The rows of alien vehicles parked near the entrance, the dimly lit guard towers, the patrolling Vraden soldiers who moved in tight formations. The Vraden had clearly learned from their earlier mistakes, but they still didn't understand what they were up against. The Deathworlders didn't just fight, they outthought their enemies. Alina raised her hand, signaling for the group to stop. They were close now. The depot was just beyond the next hill, and the Vraden defenses were concentrated on the main entrance. The team would have to take out the outer patrols first, then move in for the kill. If they could disable the depot's power grid, the Vraden would be in complete darkness, and that would give the Deathworlders the upper hand. "On my mark," Alina whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness. She looked over her soldiers, each of them poised, ready to spring into action. They had been through countless simulations, countless missions, but nothing quite like this. This was it, the final blow that would shift the balance of the war in favor of humanity. She held up one finger, then two, and with a quiet breath she brought her hand down sharply, signaling the attack. The Deathworlders moved in perfect unison. They were ghosts in the night, slipping through the shadows, using the terrain to mask their movements. Within moments they had reached the first patrol. Two Vraden soldiers walked past without noticing the humans crouched just behind a large rock. Alina's heart raced, but she kept her breathing steady. Timing was everything. One of her soldiers, Sergeant Ramos, crept forward, his silenced pistol in hand. With a single motion, he neutralized the first guard with a shot to the back of the head. The other guard spun around, but before he could raise his weapon, another Deathworlder, Private Tessa, was on him. She moved so fast that the Vraden soldier didn't even have time to react. A quick strike to the throat, and he fell without a sound. Alina gave a nod of approval. It was clean, silent, efficient. No one had hurt a thing. They continued to move forward, staying low and using every advantage the landscape provided. The Vraden never saw them coming. As they approached the edge of the depot, Alina signaled for the team to split into two groups. One would disable the power grid, while the other took out the Vraden vehicles and ammunition stores. The plan was simple: create chaos, disrupt the Vraden supply lines, and leave them vulnerable to attack. Elena moved with her team to the left, while Ramos led the other team toward the vehicles. The Vraden had parked their transports in a neat row, but they hadn't accounted for the Deathworlders' ability to infiltrate. With a series of well-placed explosive charges, Ramos's team set off a chain reaction. The first explosion ripped through the night, sending a shockwave through the air. The Vraden scrambled, but it was too late. The vehicles were destroyed in seconds. At the same time, Elena's team had reached the power grid. She looked over at Tessa, who was already working on the controls. The Vraden used a mix of human and alien technology to maintain the grid, but Tessa was an expert in both. She'd spent years studying the inner workings of alien systems, learning how to hack, how to disable, how to make the invaders' technology turn against them. With a swift series of commands, the power grid went dark. The depot was plunged into total darkness. "Perfect," Elena whispered into her comm. The Vraden had no idea what had just hit them. They had lost power, their communications, and their ability to defend the depot. Now it was time to make them pay. The Deathworlders moved quickly, striking with precision. The Vraden soldiers who had been patrolling the area were now disoriented, confused. They stumbled over each other in the darkness, unsure of where the threat was coming from. It was exactly what the Deathworlders had hoped for. The Vraden's advanced technology had made them overconfident, and now that confidence was crumbling under the weight of the human resistance. Elena and her team fought with a savage efficiency that stunned the Vraden. Every strike was calculated, every move deliberate. The Deathworlders didn't need advanced weapons. They were the weapons. They moved through the Vraden lines like a tidal wave, taking out soldiers, destroying equipment, and leaving nothing but chaos in their wake. Back at the Vraden flagship, High Commander Krylos watched helplessly as his forces were overwhelmed. The humans were attacking from every angle, using tactics he hadn't seen before. His officers scrambled to regain control, but it was too late. The Vraden were losing, and it was clear that the humans had the upper hand. Krylos slammed his fist on the console, his anger boiling over. "This is impossible," he shouted. "How can we be losing to these humans?" One of his officers, a young Vraden lieutenant, hesitated before speaking. "Sir, the humans, they're not like the species we've encountered before. They don't fight by any rules we understand. They fight like animals with no regard for their own survival. They're unpredictable, and their tactics, they're working." Krylos turned on him, his eyes filled with rage. "Then we crush them. We don't care about their tactics. We'll destroy them all." But deep down, Krylos knew the truth. The humans were not the weak, primitive species he had assumed. They were resilient, adaptable, and they had the one thing the Vraden couldn't understand: the will to survive. Krylos had underestimated them, and now the Vraden were paying the price. Back on Earth, Elena and her team were still wreaking havoc on the Vraden depot. The explosion from the power grid had set off a chain reaction that sent shockwaves through the entire complex. Ammunition stores detonated, sending flames into the sky. The Vraden were no longer in control. The Deathworlders had proven once again that they were the true masters of this battlefield. As Elena surveyed the destruction around her, she felt a sense of pride. This was just one battle in a larger war, but it was a significant one. The Vraden were retreating, their forces scattered, their confidence shattered. The tide was turning in humanity's favor. But Elena knew this victory wasn't the end. The Vraden were powerful, and they would come back stronger than ever. There was still much to be done. The Deathworlders had proven their worth, but now the real fight was just beginning. It was time to take the war to the Vraden, to show them that humanity would not stop until they were driven from Earth once and for all. Elena looked at her team, their faces grim but determined. "We've taken a big step today," she said, "but the fight is far from over. We have to keep pushing. We have to keep showing them who we are." The Deathworlders nodded in agreement. They were tired, but they were far from done. Together, they would fight until the Vraden were no more. And so, with the first major victory under their belts, humanity's resistance grew even stronger. The aliens had underestimated them once, but they wouldn't make the same mistake again. The Deathworlders had emerged from the shadows, and now they would bring the fight to the invaders. The Vraden had learned something they would never forget. Humanity was not to be underestimated.